Hey guys, what's going on? Matt the Caveman Q here again for Paleo Problem Long Island, MattTheCaveman.com. And today's question is fake news a problem in the nutrition and health sciences? I'm the Caveman! And the answer is, oh yeah. Now look, we're not talking about blogs, although that's a problem, and we're not even talking about the initial research upon which it's based, but that's a problem too. What we're actually talking about is the transmission in between. It's something like a very bad game of telephone. By the time that research actually makes it to your computer, it's gone through a number of steps and it's been so diluted, it's basically worthless. Let's take a little journey through the process through which science actually gets written about. So the original research gets published in scientific journals coming out of either an institute that's either publicly, like a university, or a private research institute. At that phase, scientists are expected to produce results in order to get grant money. So, they may be likely to hype up the data. That's not all of them, but it's possible. Next up, though, comes the press release. And that's coming out of the institution where the research was actually conducted. That's the part where we see the most folding of what the data actually says, because the institute wants to highlight the most impressive parts. Next up, though, comes the scientific writers. And a lot of times, these writers don't even have actual training in science, so they're just taking the press release at its word, and sometimes even copying things word for word and simply slapping on a hyperbolic title. From there is where things really start to get fun, because that's when we make it to the mainstream news and the actual fake news. At that point, they're taking very little of the actual data, taking the most sensationalized parts and putting on the most clickbaity title you possibly can. And that's how I end up having to do videos like, will Nutella cause cancer? Is whiskey good for you? Why is Taco Bell actually healthy? And it's absolutely insane. To give you an example of this in action, a friend of mine recently sent me an article regarding the relationship between saturated fat and all-cause mortality, basically any reason to die. It was in that third phase, the scientific article, and in it, it was summarizing research done on observational study. Basically, they observed people over a long period of time and put together trends. Now, the research in and of itself was pretty solid. They actually controlled for confounders pretty well. But it was based on food recall questionnaires. And I've talked about that concept before, but what do you have for breakfast? What do you have for lunch yesterday? What did you have for dinner on last Tuesday? See where I'm going with this? It's not always the most accurate statement. Moreover, things like a McDonald's hamburger and a calzone from the pizzeria, as long as it has meat in it, both qualify as meat. Now, that's a whole nother story, but moving past that, it gets to the press release. And in the press release phase of that study, they stated that if you replace 5% of your daily intake of calories from saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat, you'd see a reduction in 27% chance of all mortality. Meaning, you'd be 1/3 less likely to die than somebody who didn't do that. So, for point of reference though, what is 5% of your daily intake from fat? Well, let's just say that we're talking about a 2,000 calorie diet. 5% of 2,000 calories is 100. And 100 calories is roughly what a tablespoon of oil is. Slightly more depending on the oil, roughly 108 to 125, but whatever. Let's just say you took 1 tablespoon of butter and replaced it every day with 1 tablespoon of fish oil, which is a polyunsaturated fat, a quality one at fat. Well, you'd be 1/3 less likely to die. Now, that is a very bold statement to make based on observational data. But if someone actually put that into practice, it wouldn't be the worst idea. But the article I received went one step further and said that by removing saturated fat and replacing it with a polyunsaturated fat, like olive oil, you'd see that 27% reduction. Now, the problem with that is, olive oil is not a polyunsaturated fat. It's predominantly a monounsaturated fat. And those, while they saw a reduction in death by replacing saturated fat with monounsaturated, the fact of the matter is, they're not the same thing, and it was not 27%. It was a lesser number. So we already start to see the breakdown of the data going through 2 phases. Take that and go to the mainstream, and then to the fake news, well, saturated fat will kill you. See where we're going with this? The data simply does not support that. The observational study upon which it was based was a solid study, and it showed relative increases in risk of death from saturated fat. That's a fact. That's what it indicated. Now, we already illustrated the problems with the observational methods, given that the questionnaire is not the best idea. Observational studies are great for giving us correlation. Is there a relationship? They are not great for causing causation, meaning, did saturated fat cause an increase in risk of death? That's it. So you can't demonstrate that based on observational data. You need to do direct data. You need to do mechanistic data. That gets so much further than what we can talk about for today. The point I'm trying to get to is that the data itself wasn't bad. It was solidly done. From there, the press release tweaked it a little bit, but it didn't focus on everything. The scientific article that looked legitimate, first of all, didn't even get the information right, and second of all, overstated. And by the time you get to the news you're going to see on your Facebook feed, or the news you're going to see at 6 o'clock, what's it going to say? Scientists say saturated fat will kill you. Period. That's all it's going to say. Yet, we're talking literally about swapping 1 tablespoon of butter with 1 tablespoon of fish oil per day. Whether that's accurate or not, from a logical standpoint, just think about that. How insane is that? That's what you're going to hear on the news, that saturated fat is going to kill you. But we're talking about 1 tablespoon a day, regardless of what everything else you're eating. So, your biggest takeaways for today are, is fake news a problem in nutrition and health science? And the answer, of course, is unbelievably yes. There are too many phases that research has to go through before it finally makes it to your plate. So, what can you do? Be aware of what faulty science looks like. Be aware of if it actually explains the methods and the actual technical terminology. If it's avoiding that, the people that wrote it or are reporting on it probably don't understand it. When I use technical language or break down mechanisms, it's not to confuse you, it's not to talk over you. The point is to demonstrate that I'm not just pulling this out of thin air. Everything I do is grounded in science. And as the data changes, my positions change. I used to be completely anti-starch and sugar. More data came out, I'm more open to it, depending on the population. Things aren't set in stone, but you need to be aware of what you're actually looking at. So, either way though, hopefully this helped you out. You know what to do. Like and subscribe down below, share it with your friends, head over to Instagram and Twitter and follow me at MikeTheCaveman, over on Facebook at Pale Prime Long Island, and of course over MikeTheCaveman.com. That being said, have a wonderful rest of your day. Skip the alternative facts, and I'll see you tomorrow. Answer is probably not. Now, look, I love coffee. I love butter.